Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about meditation and specifically focusing on the first chapter of the Yoga Sutra-s. It kind of starts really at the discussion of Ishvara and Ishvara Pranidhana and what that looks like. And then, which is around chapter 1, verse 27, 28, and 29, where Patanjali is speaking about Om being the mystical syllable that embodies or calls upon or cultivates this Ishvara Pranidhana, this practice of Ishvara Pranidhana. And in the Yoga Sutras chapter 2, it talks about how Ishvara Pranidhana, the effects of it or perfection in this niyama brings about samadhi. Yeah. And it's a callback again to this first chapter where we're talking about Ishvara Pranidhana and the recitation of Om, Tasya Vachaka Pranavaha. So, and then Tajapasta Dartha Bhavanam. So the Ishvara is best represented by the pranavaha. Pranavaha, it means humming, the sound of the Om.
That vibrates our nervous system.
Right, and stimulates the vagus nerve like we talked about earlier today.
It's so interesting. I can't even imagine what it would be like 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, and to realize that sounds that we make affect our mind.
Yeah.
And to sit there and say, even without being superstitious, if we're just being really rational, it's like if I make a particular sound, it shuts my mind off. And how phenomenal that must have been, and the opportunity to immediately project the religious instinct onto that sensation. It must have been incredibly seductive.
And so, and then to chant Om, to chant this mystical sound, or the pranavaha, to hum, and have that vibration and think about its meaning, to concentrate upon its meaning being, Om there's a whole Upanishad. The Mandukya Upanishad speaks about Om and its many meanings. Part of sort of the meaning, because it's a trinity, the A, U, Ma, A being starting at the guttural sound, the very back of the vocal cords being one of the first sounds we make, A. U being the palatal sound, so the stimulation of the upper part of the mouth, and then Ma being the labial sound ending at the lips, and again a very primal sound, a very basic sound. Most children, one of their first words is mama, so or ama, right? Ama.
Can we say every child?
Every child, I think most. It's one of the first sounds we make as humans. Yeah. And so Om is said to contain within it all of language. Every sound from language comes from that range of use of the vocal cords and comes out of those very primal basic expressions. And also it represents the beginning of creation, the sustaining of creation, and then the end of creation. It represents the waking state, the dreaming state, the sleeping state, and then the fourth stage is the vibration, the soundless state, or the stage beyond sleep and waking and dreaming. Tairia, I think it's called. But also that fourth sound in the Om, the sound that happens in the stillness and the silence, is said to be that inner sound, the nada, that inner vibration that's always happening within us. And so by chanting the Om with meaning and concentrating on its meaning, we're able to redirect our focus and our awareness into that inner vibration that's always there. And that's the Om within ourselves. And so this is, in the first chapter, the beginning of how we start to learn to concentrate the mind. And it's using sound, taking this idea of sound as the one point of focus, as the thing that we're using as our meditation technique. And this is very common meditation technique in India, is using sound or mantra, and the repetition of the mantra or the sound to help channelize the mind or our thoughts or our thinking, or still our thinking, so that we can become very one-pointed and concentrated on just the sensation and the vibration of that sound.
The ekagrata.
The ekagrata, yes. And that, it comes right after we speak about this japa, or this recitation of mantra. The next sutra right away goes into this ekagrata, that tat pratishe dartam ekatatva bhyasaha. So you should take one practice, or practice one thing for a long period of time to eliminate disturbances or obstacles to your practice.
Mm-hmm. And this is literally anything. Any practice, any sensation, any kind of thought, any kind of word, you're using that thing, whether it's the sound of your voice, whether it's a mandala, whether it's a single point, you're using this single sensation, whether it's a rosary or a rose window, you're concentrating the mind on this one thing so that it can become absorbed.
And so we've been given first this idea of use of sound, and then the instruction to make our mind very focused on one point or one practice. And then the Yoga Sutras say, well, in order to make the mind really focused on one practice or on one point, you need to cultivate the right conditions so that the mind can relax and focus.
Yeah.
And we go into Sutra 133. So in chapter 1, verse 33, Maitri Karuna Mudito Pekshanam Sukha Dukkha Punya Apunya Vishayanam Bhavanata Chittasya Bhavana. So this is really an interesting sutra, because in this part of the Yoga Sutras, almost all of these meditation techniques or ways of concentrating the mind are also found in the practices of Buddhism. And so I find this part of the Yoga Sutras very interesting, because I feel that you can really see how the Buddhist practices and yogic practices were being cultivated and growing up together in a similar area. And even the practitioners were talking and in discussion, and because there's just so many similarities between Buddhist meditation practices and the practices talked about here in the Yoga Sutras. So even this idea of taking one object to calm the mind, and how you make the mind calm in Buddhism is samantha, which is to balance the mind or to make it equal and steady.
It's interesting. I don't think you were here. I don't think you were there that day. Our philosophy and Sanskrit teacher, Jayashri, and her cousin brother Narasimha, they were talking about this sutra, and Narasimha was just marvelous and started talking about the act of lovemaking in the middle of this Brahmin library in Mysore. And he said that the act of lovemaking is the concentration of the mind on a single point to the exclusion of all other things. And then this is when we climax or we become absorbed is when we are totally concentrated. And of course, all of us know that this is impossible when we are self-conscious, when we are aware of our sticky fat, or we are aware of the children in the next room, or we're very aware of too much, then we cannot concentrate the mind on a single point. And so in this regard, this really drives home the point of the set and setting of the meditative activity, so that you want the right light, you want the right surfaces, you want everything to be nest-like, so that you feel safe to concentrate the mind. When you are in practice, when you are practicing, ultimately an expert has no problem.
You've transcended the conditions.
The difficulty of concentrating the mind on a single point, yeah.
So there's the next sutra, the one that I chanted about, Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, and Upekshanam. In Buddhism, these are called the Brahma-viharas. And in Pali, they're Metta, Karuna, Mudita, and Upekkha, which are pretty much the same words. Maitri and Metta being a little bit different, but we're to cultivate these qualities or these attitudes, these virtues within ourselves and within our minds, so that we can make the mind steady and stable and fit for meditation. So without cultivating these qualities, there's very little chance that we're going to be able to concentrate or drop into meditation. And so this is our foundation for deeper states of meditation. So this sutra is talking about how we should cultivate friendliness towards the happy. Those people. And so this is because when you become friends with something or someone, you start to be like that person. You take on their qualities. You start to share their attitudes and behaviors. That's just the product of friendship. Mm-hmm. And so this is why our parents always said, be careful who your friends are, mm-hmm. right? Because you start to mirror them. Mm-hmm. And scientifically, we know this is also the case because we have these mirror neurons mm-hmm. in our brain. And so what we think about, what we're around, what we're next to, we start to become like.
We recreate in our body and in our mind.
And so we should be near and friendly with those who are happy, because then it will create happiness within ourselves as well. We should be compassionate or karuna towards the suffering or those people who are in a bad space. Dukkha literally means a bad space. Sukha means a good space. So be with people in a good space. Be compassionate to people in a bad space. Or those who are suffering or negative. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Down on their luck.
It's better than kicking them.
Yeah, don't kick them. And also you don't want to have an attitude of friendship, because then you're just commiserating the agony. You're sharing in their pain. You're recreating their problem within yourself or their pain within yourself.
It's like a bellows to a fire.
Yeah. Now, instead of one person crying, there's two people crying. So you should cultivate compassion so that you can help lift them up out of the despair.
I've told you this before, there's a Zen koan. I guess it's more of a story, but the monk is walking in the snow, and he sees Suzuki has fallen in the snow, and so he gets down into the snow with him. And it's an interesting story because it's like, well, what do you do when someone's in pain, when someone's suffering? And in a way, I wonder if he's making the problem worse, or is he truly empathetic? Can he truly feel the other person's pain? Mm.
I think it's the difference between empathy and compassion.
At the same time, it's very amusing.
Anyway, so you should be compassionate, cultivate compassion so that you can help lift those up who are suffering or in a bad place. And then mudita is joy or celebration. And you should celebrate the virtuous or the goodness, the people who are getting accolades. And so
that's very difficult.
It's very difficult, but it helps to eliminate envy and jealousy when we celebrate or are happy for those who have good things happening for them.
Why are they so good?
And then upeksha is like equanimity. Sometimes it gets translated as indifference, but indifference sometimes has a bit of a negative connotation to it. And I feel equanimity is more balanced towards those who are unmeritorious or evil or doing negative things or terrible things.
This is just getting harder and harder.
Yeah.
Because there are people that I have really very strong feelings.
Yeah, no meditation towards. For you.
No meditation for me. Yeah, they haunt my meditation.
Yeah, you can't meditate if you're upset about bad things going on.
It's been 3.5 years.
So, yeah, you have to cultivate equanimity towards those who are causing suffering in the world. Yes, this is Sutra 133. So these Brahma-viharas, or these virtues, they help to reduce the negative tendencies in ourselves, right? They help to reduce envy and jealousy. They help to eliminate rajas and tamas and bring up the quality of sattva, which is clarity and balance and transparency and harmony and lightness. And so when the quality of sattva is stimulated, so even the practices of asana or pranayama help to increase this quality of sattva, the mind naturally is drawn to or attracted to meditation. It's naturally drawn to and attracted towards practices that are increasing steadiness and wisdom and enlightenment. When our mind is very busy, or very rajasic, it has a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, anger, lust, greed, it's very accumulative. It wants the hungry mind. It's difficult to focus on wisdom or enlightenment because you're hungry for things, you're desiring. This is very rajasic. When the mind is very tamastic, it's very sad and down and lethargic and depressed and heavy and dark. Again, it's not naturally drawn to things of wisdom, right? So you're feeling really down and depressed and someone's like, yeah, you should, meditate on the light. You're like, go away. I don't want to meditate. I just want to be down and depressed. So what this sutra does is it helps to create positive relationships with people around us, and also even more so, a positive association in our mind with things, so that our mind can be calm and relaxed and not disturbed by the emotions and the negative tendencies that it naturally has. Anything you want to add to the Brahma-viharas?
Yeah, I think at the same time, though, I would say that maintaining a balance of mind in the darkness is its own kind of, has its own value, where you can listen to something very sad, like the music of Nick Drake, and you can think about the tragedy of his life, and yet maintain joy in his music, and say, this is a wonderful feeling. I'm not caught up in the story, and I'm not gonna also, destroy myself.
Well, then you would be having compassion. You'd be having equanimity towards maybe a tendency to be dragged down into the depths of despair, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would say, oh, I'm having an equanimous association with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm having a friendship with the sound that I'm enjoying, that I'm liking. I'm having compassion towards Nick Drake and his plight in life that drove him to kill himself, right? You're not like having friendship with him, like, oh, I'm going into the depths of despair, I'm going to kill myself, right? But you're having compassion to that.
Yeah.
You're celebrating his virtue as an artist.
Yeah.
So
I think that's what
to maintain the balance of the mind, you have to practice all of these aspects.
I think perhaps that's what we mean by aesthetic appreciation. There's a detachment to the word aesthetic appreciation. You're not trapped in the vritti of it, but you are you enjoy it, and yet you are not merged. So this is interesting, because I think the point of music and art is to become immersed and merged, and yet not lose the balance of our mind in the sensation of it.
Yeah.
Tough.
So, okay, I'm going to, Alice, do you want to ask your question?
Hello.
Oh, Miss Vivian.
Hi.
Hi. So, in like the social media, we've been hearing about spiritual bypassing. And so when we think of equanimity, or trying not to get affected by negative people or negative things, what would be the balance in between? I'm not really understanding, I think, what is that spiritual bypassing about, but like in not ignoring the negativity, but dealing with it. I feel like there might be a connection, maybe, or because with all these practices, we are trying to get away from that a little, but at the same time, we cannot not react. Yeah, I'm not very clear. Sorry, but
yeah, no, that's a great question. I think with the spiritual bypassing, the problem is that we're not seeing or responding to what's around us. So instead of seeing what's in front of us and responding appropriately or reacting, acknowledging the reality, we're instead saying, oh, I just, it's just love and light, and
it's all good.
It's all good. It's okay.
It's actually not all good.
Yeah. And so the spiritual practice isn't really about necessarily like trying to make things all good when it's not all good.
Or pretending that things are all good when they're not all good.
Right. It's, if something terrible is going on, or there's a terrible person, say, doing terrible things, it's not saying you shouldn't take action against that person or do something to prevent harm from happening. It's not about like kind of cocooning and becoming just like in your own little nest of protection. You have to act especially as a yoga practitioner. Yoga is a path of action. And so we're meant to face the trouble bravely and courageously, also one of the virtues from another sutra, with great virya, with great strength. We have to rise up and act and confront those things. But the equanimity comes in the balance of the mind. So if someone's shouting at you and angry, you can respond in a way that isn't angry, but is informed with, say, intelligence or wisdom and love and compassion,
and correct the situation.
Or you could start shouting back. And so when you start, if someone's angry at you and you are reactive and angry at them, you lose the balance of your mind. You are not being equanimous, but you're taking it as a personal affront. Now there's two people shouting.
So shouting might be the best response to a child that is stepping into a road.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not to say shouting's always bad.
But you do so with loving kindness.
Yeah. So there's a funny story. Some of you have practiced Vipassana meditation in the Goenkaji tradition, and Goenkaji tells a story about his teacher. His meditation teacher was teaching some students, and there was somebody doing something that wasn't correct, or he had been told not to do something and he was doing it anyway. And so his teacher went and shouted at him very sternly in a very, seemingly angry kind of way to get the student to stop doing the thing that he had already been told not to do. And then he turned around and started smiling and walking away. And he said to Goenkaji, "Oh, I had to shout at him." And he was like quite, unaffected by it, like thought the whole situation was like funny because it was like a drama to him. He was playing this role of someone shouting so that he could get through to this person, but he himself wasn't upset or angry. And so I think that the equanimity isn't about not acting and not acting appropriately for the situation, but it's about not losing yourself in the action, realizing that you're taking the action isn't you, the action isn't acting you're acting the action in a sense.
It's acting as a theater. Yeah.
As all things are.
I had another story that reminded me of that. I think 25 years ago, I was in a Buddhist temple in South Korea, that's where I was practicing. And I remember that there was a bird trapped in the temple. It was an extraordinary temple. It was the 3000 Buddha temple, and in Bongwansa, just outside of Seoul. And there's an enormously beautiful gold Buddha, and in the ceiling was this extraordinarily intricate geometric shapes carved from wood. And they were just extraordinarily beautiful, and they're meant to represent the prismatic nature of the mind. And amazing. And there was a bird in the temple, a pigeon of some kind. And the head monk was sort of trying to manage this situation. It's like, well, we have to get the bird out of the temple because it will, shit on these things. And there was a caretaker there, and the caretaker was listening to the monk's desire to get the bird out of the temple. I was like, yeah, that's important. Okay, yeah, I get it. Agaseo, which means I understand. Get the bird out. And the caretaker took a rock and he threw it at the bird. And the monk saw it all happen, and I saw the monk seeing it all happen. Because you can't throw rocks at this, hundreds of years old prismatic wooden structures, whether there's a bird on them or not. You can't throw rocks in the temple. But that's, but watching the monk's face as the full understanding of the consequences of his actions, where he's paralyzed, just like Arjuna is. Damned if you do and damned if you don't. And like, the only thing you can do at that moment is remove the caretaker from the situation, which is what he did.
So I hope that answers the question, Alice. If it doesn't, you raise your hand again. And Janet?
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering what you would say about relating this sutra to not just externally other people, but to ourselves, and when we're dealing with like shame spirals and, you know, like those
Yeah.
unpleasant feelings, which really struck my nerve the other day in your email.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It's all of these exactly. It's not just with other people, but even with yourself. If you know, when you're in a happy mood, when you're feeling good, it's like, yeah, cultivate more of that. Be friends with that. Say, yeah, this is a good. We should stay in this good space. We're in a good space now. This is good. We're gonna try to be in this space for as long as possible, but inevitably dukkha comes, right? Sukha is not forever, so dukkha, suffering, the bad space comes, and to catch yourself, to have that awareness, oh, dukkha, now I'm suffering, now I'm really like dealing with this. And then to have also compassion, right? Like, oh, you know, maybe it's suffering because of something you did, or maybe it's a misunderstanding, or it's something someone else did. There's all kinds of suffering. Maybe it's a natural disaster.
So Harmony and I applied this technology to our suffering 2 days ago. We had scheduled an interview for our podcast, Harmony's podcast, Finding Harmony. And we got on the interview and very quickly accidentally insulted the guest deeply. And then,
apparently.
and then she felt it.
Yeah.
And then in turn, she insulted us, and we felt very small and stupid. And then she ended the interview, and
you will never hear it.
You will never hear that one. That one's not going on the air. And we were left with a shame spiral. And both of us, we couldn't even be around each other because the shame was so great that I just need to be by myself for a bit. And it was at that point that we applied the technology that Goenkaji taught us, which is the only thing that you can do when you are hit by wave after wave of shame
and
suffering, is to sit still and take in no more information. You just have to sit as the wave hits you, and the wave hits you, and then hopefully in between waves you can find compassion. And then we came together after about an hour. We came together in the kitchen, and we said, well, she is clearly suffering, and we're now feeling what she was feeling. And so we're going to suffer this. And he said, I don't know if I can come back from this. I don't know if I can try this again with this person ever again. I don't even know if I can talk to her friends. And I said, well, in 6 months, is what we said to each other, in 6 months, we'll have gotten over this. And that's what we said. It's like, yeah, okay, well, let's see how we feel in 6 months when all of these shame spirals have worked out and we don't feel like shit.
But it's interesting because you have to have compassion for yourself, because like sometimes we do things that we are unaware of.
We saw what we did.
You know, it's no one's fault. It's just sometimes maybe you say something that somebody finds offensive. You're not trying to be offensive. You're not trying to hurt their feelings or anything like that, right?
But that's what happened.
So you have to have compassion for your own self, because you're like, oh, wow, I really
screwed the pooch.
Yeah, messed up, right? Or I didn't do all that stuff that I was supposed to do around the house. I didn't clean my house. I didn't get all my work done. Okay, well, you have to have compassion for yourself. Like, it's a lot. There's a lot going on right now emotionally for everybody around the world, right? Whether, it doesn't really matter what your situation is. It's a lot happening, a lot of collective anxiety, collective fear, collective suffering, collective hardship, and we're all feeling it because we're connected to a greater, consciousness, or we're connected to each other, even if you just want to think of it as virtually or through television or media or whatever.
But also there's an element to how much you can endure. And so you have to sit with it.
Yeah.
And so both of us did that. Both of us sat quietly and did things and let the shame spiral wave over us. And then also we went and did things that were spiritually bypassing, which were to displace this feeling for a little while, like watching Conan the Barbarian with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which was awesome. Way more nudity than I remembered.
It wasn't really spiritually bypassing. It was just more distracting.
It was, well, that's what I mean. Yeah, we were able to shift and distract our minds for a little while, so we didn't have to be immersed in that awfulness.
Well, also sometimes you can't fix something, right? It either is or it isn't. There's nothing you can do to change it. So you have to just be with it and let it be. It is what it is. It's, it's not a nice thing, maybe not nice for you, not nice for someone else. But you can't also just keep, like, it's like having a scab. And if you keep pulling the scab off, it never heals, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of like leave it alone. Just put it over there. Let it be in its sacred spot, no matter how ugly it is. There it is. Continue doing your work, continue doing what you do, and then you can come back and look at it again. Okay, yeah, there it is. Maybe you'll see it a little differently, right?
It's humiliating, but we offered our apologies, which is really the best that we can do. Doing that meant taking the higher ground. We thought that she was at fault.
But it doesn't matter. The thing is it doesn't matter. And that's where the equanimity comes in. It's not about being right or being wrong, or making someone right or making someone wrong, or you needing to, be virtuous. It's like, okay,
I want justice. I want her to know how badly she hurt our feelings.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. And so that's where the equanimity comes in, is you have to keep the balance of your mind and look at it from a position of not your personal ego being invested.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the situation, there's these two people, there's been a misunderstanding, both people feel hurt or upset. And so how can their relationship be restored? And so if you take your ego out of it, it's always easier to look at someone else's problems. Someone else comes to you and says, oh, this happened to me, and and you're like, oh, it's so easy, just do this, right? Because your ego's not involved in their problem. So if you can start to do that with yourself a little bit, take your ego out of it and start looking at it like, okay, then it's very clear what has to happen. And it doesn't have to mean anything about you. And that's part of the problem, is we make all these things mean something about you, or about ourselves, or about that person. It doesn't have to mean that somebody else is nasty or, inhospitable or trying to be wretched. And it doesn't have to mean that I'm trying to be, an idiot or ignorant or, racist or whatever, right? And so it's just a misunderstanding, and misunderstandings happen all the time. So, but they can cause a lot of suffering. Yeah. And especially if your ego gets involved and is trying to make you right. And so, but this is for everything. If you're in a bad space, have compassion for yourself. If something good is happening, if you've done something good, you've been virtuous, you should celebrate yourself. I think that's really important. We really don't celebrate ourselves enough. So, in this situation, we were able to kind of resolve and mend the relationship. And I was like, okay, perfect, great. Let's just let that be. We're just going to celebrate that things didn't completely collapse into a terrible place.
Hatred.
And we can all just move on and be free of it. We don't have to keep churning the drama over and over and over again. And so that's also something I think that's helpful is how can you address drama when it arises in your life and feel complete with it. Because if you don't feel complete with it, the mind keeps hanging on to it and churning it. And especially if you don't resolve relationships, because we're relational in our nature. And so our mind loves those kinds of dramas with relationships. So when you can feel like things are right and balanced and, happy, or not even happy, but just like peaceful in your relationships, the mind can relax and enter meditation more easily. If there's something wrong in your relationships with people, then the mind is always busy. It's always trying to solve the problem. And that's where the sutra comes in.
Yeah. At least going forward, we didn't exacerbate the situation any further than it was. And we let it go, and we didn't call her a bitch.
Yeah, no.
But now we can let months go by until we forget this feeling. It's like, do you remember when we had that feeling? It's like, yeah, we didn't really. Do you want to try talking to her again? Like, maybe.
But it works with everything, even like, whether you practice in the morning, this can turn into a shame spiral. Oh, I didn't have time to do my practice today. And then you're like beating yourself up over it. And if you just stop for a moment and like take yourself out of the situation, take your ego out of the situation, and look at yourself in a broader, bigger context, and have compassion for what you were dealing with, or what you did do that day, or why you didn't practice. Maybe you really did need to take extra rest. Maybe that was actually really helpful for you.
Yeah. Right?
And then stop like tying the mind to these should haves, could haves, would haves. I would have said something differently. And just accept the situation and then deal with it as you need to, with compassion and equanimity, trying to keep the mind from making it a bigger thing than it needs to be. It's helpful. So I hope that helps to answer the question. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I just quickly want to talk a little bit. I won't go into it in great detail, but so following this fertile soil, Patanjali talks about different ways that you can concentrate the mind. And so I mentioned that these were all also in Buddhism, and I'm just going to mention them briefly. We won't go into them in great length, but maybe another time we can go into them at great length. But one is focusing on the breath, the exhalation, and the retention. So it's basically taking pranayama as a object of meditation. The next one is focusing on subtle sensation or super sensation. So focusing like either at the tip of the nose to increase heightened smell, say, or on the tongue to increase heightened taste, or just observing subtle sensation in the mind-body complex. The other thing you could concentrate on is the inner light. So at first you might imagine an inner light at your heart center, and eventually the light becomes manifest. So focusing on that. The next one is focusing on the state of the mind in dreaming or deep sleep. So sometimes you have a really lovely dream. Maybe it's created a very good feeling. You wake up and you're like, oh, I just wish I could stay in that dream state. So using that as an object for meditation can help to make the mind more sattvic and cultivate that state within you. Also, in deep sleep, the chitta, it's like yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. It's like the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind, except there's tamas, so you're sleeping. So trying to maintain or to recreate that sensation of deep sleep while you're awake is another way to concentrate the mind. Concentrating the mind, again, on stillness or desireless state. Or if you can't have a desireless state, envisioning somebody that you might know, like a guru or a very high being or person. Maybe it's a Christ figure for you, or a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, or a Shiva or a deity of some sort. So taking this image of this person and focusing and concentrating your mind on that image or that desireless person or being. And again, this is what you focus on, you become like. And so it's trying to train the mind to focus on this type of very high person or high being. And eventually you start to become like that person or that being.
A little bit.
A little bit. And then eventually it says, as Russell said earlier, if none of these objects work for you, or you don't feel connected to any of them, then pick whatever you feel connected to. Pick the object that works for you. And so in a very non-sort of, I guess, traditional yogic sense of like ancient yoga, but more modern yoga, Iyengar in the Tree of Yoga, his book, he says you could even take asana. The practice of asana is a form of meditation. And if you approach asana in the right way, it can create this stillness of the mind, and it can become an object of meditation for you to enter into this state of samadhi. So as we focus the mind and become very one-pointed in that focus, our thoughts, our emotions, our ego starts to become calm and non-disturbing. They start to become very weak, and we start to enter into a state of samadhi where we feel basically the object that we've taken for meditation, our sense of self. So as you were talking, we have to get rid of our self-consciousness. Mm-hmm. So we kind of lose ourself, right? We lose this sense of self-consciousness or separate identity. And then you have the object of meditation, and then even the act of the meditation, or the act of the relationship between the object and the person, all kind of dissolve into one thing. Which is interesting because it's sort of what Narasimhan was speaking about in that love making, in the climax, when you lose the sense of self and you've even kind of lost any sense of separateness from your partner, and even the act itself is dissolved and gone, and it's a type of samadhi where you're completely absorbed for a moment in something beyond, transcendent of what's actually going on.
And how ridiculous it all is.
So you can contemplate lovemaking for the rest of the week. And how it's a gateway to samadhi. But what I love about this example actually is that it really shows, because sometimes we think that yoga is like this thing, this spiritual practice, and this thing that's like here, and then the rest of our lives is happening over here.
With Satan.
Yeah, with Satan or the devil or whatever, right? That the two are two very different things. And I love this example because it really shows how the yoga is in everything we do. And how it's infused into every aspect of our life, into how we relate to our partners, to our children, to people around us, how we
to our bodies.
How we treat our own bodies even. Ahimsa has to happen to ourselves before it can happen to other people. And so it's really so integrated into everything that we're doing. And it's such a nice example of really how samadhi arises when we become very concentrated even on something as primal as making love. So we were going to do a little meditation. Is there any last questions? I thought 3 hours was going to be too long, but apparently we like to talk a lot.
Have we lost anybody?
Just a couple people.
Yeah, surely someone needs to walk their dog by now.
Okay. So we'll just do a quick meditation, a short one, not a long one, for all of you who have stuck with us as we went over time. So I'm going to guide you through just a short anapana, focusing on the breath, the exhalation, the retention, the pause between the inhalation and the exhalation. And then we'll move into a little bit of a Vipassana style meditation, observing the subtle sensations in the body. So this is as described also in the Yoga Sutras. And then we'll move a little bit into a metta or a loving kindness meditation, a short one, that again is similar to Sutra 133 or this, the Brahma-viharas. Okay, so you can just take a comfortable seat, whatever works for you. And if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, you can close your eyes, or you can just half close the eyes and find a gazing spot on the floor where the senses are undistracted and the eyes can rest. And then just take a deep, full inhale, filling the lungs completely. Pausing at the top. And then exhale, emptying the lungs completely. And pause at the bottom. And then just breathing naturally, but slightly suspending the breath at the top. There's a pause, a stillness. And then following the breath as it comes down to the pelvic floor. And again, there's a pause and a stillness. And just continue observing the sensation of the breath, the inhalation and the exhalation. And allow that space at the top and the bottom of the breath to just extend, deepen, and expand a little. Just observe what it's like to sit in that stillness, in that suspension. It's just a natural suspension and lengthening of the pause. And bring the attention, your awareness to the top of the head. See if you can concentrate on the subtle sensation at the top of the head. And slowly bring the awareness down to the forehead, the back of the skull, the eyebrows, the eyes, the cheekbones, the nose, the cheeks, the ears, and the jaw, the lips. Allow the awareness to travel down, just observing the sensation of the neck and the throat, the front of the neck and the back of the neck. Observing the shoulders, the clavicle, the breastbone. Observing the chest and the back of the rib cage. Observe the upper arms down to the elbows, the forearms, the wrists, the palms of the hands and the tops of the hands and all of the fingers. Continue drawing the awareness towards the belly button, into the pelvic floor, into the hip sockets and the legs and the hips, and down through the tops of the legs, to the knees, to the lower legs, to the ankles, to the feet, to the tips of the toes. And then draw your awareness back up from the tips of the toes, through the sole of the feet and the top of the feet to the ankles, into the lower limbs of the legs and the knees and the thighs, the backs of the legs, the fronts of the legs, into the tops of the legs and the hips, into the pelvic floor, to the lower lumbar spine. And then moving the awareness up through the lower belly to the belly button, and towards the thoracic spine and the rib cage, the back of the rib cage and the front of the rib cage, the chest, the clavicle. Bringing the awareness to the tips of the fingers, to the palms of the hands and the tops of the hands, the wrists, the lower arms, the elbows, into the upper arms, into the shoulders, to the neck, the bottom of the neck, all the way up to the top where the head meets the top of the spine, the jaw, the ears, the cheeks and the cheekbones, the nose and the lips, the eyes, the eyelids, the temples, the back of the head, the sides of the head, the forehead, all the way up to the crown of the head. And allow your awareness to just drop and rest in the heart center. Just envisioning a warm light, the center of yourself, the seat of your heart, of your true self, your awareness. Within this warmth light, you can just repeat, may I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be happy and free. Just allow this sense of joy and peacefulness and warmth and love and compassion just radiate from the center of your heart through your whole body, your mind. Then extending this sense outward. It can be to one person or to many people. It can be to all beings everywhere. May all be filled with loving kindness. May all be well. May all be healthy, healed, and made whole. May all be peaceful and at ease. May all be happy and free, liberated. Just allowing the light and the warmth to radiate and shine. Feeling that interconnectedness to all beings everywhere, or to your special person, or your special being. And one more time, returning home to the seat of yourself. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be happy and free. Just bringing the awareness back to your natural breath. Observing the breath. Allowing the residue to just rest and settle. Just soak in that energy. Soak in that awareness, that consciousness, that training and directing of the mind. And we'll chant Om 3 times. Inhaling deep. And then as you feel ready, you can slowly open your eyes, gradually allowing the light to just gently come in. Good. Thank you so much. Thanks for sticking with us. Sorry we went a little bit over, but we wanted to finish with the meditation.